London, England. Summer, 2001. This secret garden. This secret garden I found is an early summer poem of cutgrass air and bird song, the silky fragrance of tree blossoms, benches quiet in contemplation, a solitary book with a man, unfolding and refreshing at 10 minutes to 6 on a green London evening. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in, for pausing sometime in your day or night to join me and our near, far, and wide listening circle. I'm glad you chose to be here for show 175, coming to you live from the novelesque coast of Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more fully, more alively, more poetically. Last week's show was how we speak, how we listen, going beyond what we say to the ways we talk, communicate, articulate. Likewise to the spectrum of ways we listen, from deeply at one end to barely or not at all at the other. And not just how either, but also how well, especially in this age of mass distraction and ever more disembodied forms of connecting and conversing we're in, which is why I chose that theme. And to say and show also that despite the challenges, there's still so much opportunity for us to speak and listen ever more clearly, committedly, and satisfyingly. As I said last week, the rewards far outweigh the effort. And part of that is bringing your real, whole presence to every exchange. Well, this week, it's the joys of books and reading, real books, and really engaged reading. The pleasures, comforts, discoveries, and inspirations books can and do bring us. The myriad worlds, realms, and theaters of thought and feeling they evoke, open us to, transport us to, and have for people of every stripe and civilization and culture since there were books. And yes, as many of you know, and take time to savor the deep satisfaction of sitting or laying back to read in a cozy chair or a bed, on a couch or park bench, on a beach, a porch, a train or plane, or a table for one. And the joy of giving and receiving gifts of books and recommending ones that you love to others, and more. So I hope if you haven't heard it, dip in when you can, if you're interested. Well, the good news is there's been a great rise in books and book readers, especially during and since the pandemic. And that's so encouraging. It's something we can't afford to lose or lose sight of, the value of, in our lives, in our world. For those who don't know or don't remember all those rewards, the satisfactions, why not take the opportunity soon to experience them? Starting with any book that leaps out at you, that captures your attention, interest, or fancy. Whether it's a book of poetry, short stories, a novel, a biography, or some great nonfiction. Just begin. Move away from the screen. Take and hold a book in your hands. Feel the weight of it, the texture of it, the style of the type, the invitation of it, and get between the covers of it. Really get between those covers. So, I've gathered and choreographed a number of pages and passages of fitting cultural commentary, quotes, poetry, and some anecdotes to leaf through together to give you and all of us a good taste of, and toast to these and other bookish joys. Let's begin with a teleporting to France, to Paris. This is January 2017, when I was channeling Paris, we could say, and a scene at a bookstore there, a real bookstore. This is dedicated to Catherine S. at La Procure. Atop the spines. On the other side of the Place Saint-Sulpice, past the lashing tail of a tawny French lioness and the silent askings for alms of an ever-present mendicant, you enter a holy sea of books, bobbing together on swells of forehead-high shelves, ancient and modern writings and ponderings of deep and shallower kinds, flowing tolerantly under the same roof, Catholic and Celtic, Jewish and atheist, Essene and Sufi, Shinto and Macumba, heathenist and Hellenist, Mayan and Rosicrucian, Buddhist and Babist. And as you look above their lines, atop the spines, your eyes are filled with dozens, horizons of curious moving shapes and colors, hats of highly reverent kinds, mitres, birrettas, cornets and camauros, wimples, streimels, veiled kalimavakians, and more. Nary a derby or straw boater, cloche or cartwheel in the whole flotilla, except one boy-red pom-pommed calotte, clanging a wild and woolly note in the overly serious, bookish air. Atop the spines. Erica Young, which has her poem is Books. It starts with a quote by Jorge Luis Borges. The universe, which others call the library. Books. Books which are stitched up the center with coarse white thread. Books on the beach with sunglass-colored pages. Books about food with pictures of weeping grapefruits. Books about baking bread with browned corners. Books about long-haired Frenchmen with uncut pages. Books of erotic engravings with pages that stick. Books about inns whose stars have sputtered out. Books of illumination surrounded by darkness. Books with blank pages and printed margins. Books with fanatical footnotes in no-point type. Books with book lice. Books with rice paper pastings. Books with book fungus blooming over their pages. Books with pages of skin with flesh-colored bindings. Books by men in love with the letter O. Books which smell of earth, whose pages turn. Thank you, Erica Young. Had not read that of hers. Lovely. Robert Louis Stevenson, back from the 1800s, the writer of so many adventures, some you may know, may have read in your time, back in time, including Treasure Island, that captivated me, certainly as a boy, among other things. This is his poem, The Land of Storybooks. The Land of Storybooks. At evening, when the lamp is lit, around the fire my parents sit. They sit at home and talk and sing and do not play at anything. Now, with my little gun, I crawl all in the dark along the wall and follow round the forest track away behind the sofa back. There, in the night, where none can spy, all in my hunter's camp, I lie and play at books that I have read till it is time to go to bed. These are the hills, these are the woods, these are my starry solitudes, and there the river by whose brink the roaring lions come to drink. I see the others far away, as if in firelit camp they lay, and I, like to an Indian scout, around their party prowled about. So when my nurse comes in for me, home I return across the sea and go to bed with backward looks at my dear land of storybooks. Thank you, Robert Louis Stevenson. It's one I did not know, and a poet I did not know. E. Ethelbert Miller. Reading another poetry book. I take her in my hands. I open her gently. I part her pages. I stare at her words. I want her letters in my mouth. I run my hand down her spine. I love reading her. I love making love to her. I let her fall asleep in my lap. Thank you, E. Ethelbert Miller, for that. From Punta Zamac in Tulum, Mexico, February 2006. Around certain settings that heighten the deliciousness of reading, like storms around us. This is Reading in the Rain. Our reader reclines under a warm wool blanket with a good book on a broad bed in a dry room by the ocean's edge, while, through half-open windows, rain falls all along a dark coast, out across an unlit ocean, falls for miles through the black, blustering, starless sky, down to over-sodden sand, comforting our lone reader under his blanket, in his watertight room, between the lines and dry leaves of his lamplit book. I sourced some quotes for us. Here are some of many more that I had found, a smattering of them, about the joys of reading. This is from bustle.com. Neil Gaiman said, "A book is a dream that you hold in your hand." Joyce Carol Oates, "Reading is the sole means by which we slip involuntarily, often helplessly, into another's skin, another's voice, another's soul." Victor Hugo, "To learn to read is to light a fire. Every syllable that is spelled out is a spark." Wonderful. Not heard that before. Anne Lamott, "What a miracle it is that out of these small, flat, rigid squares of paper unfolds world after world after world, worlds that sing to you, comfort and quiet or excite you. Books help us understand who we are and how we are to behave. They show us what community and friendship mean. They show us how to live and die." And Lamont. James Baldwin, "You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. It was books that taught me that the things that tormented me most were the very things that connected me with all the people who were alive or who had ever been alive." Gustave Flaubert, "Do not read as children do to amuse yourself, or like the ambitious for the purpose of instruction. No, read in order to live." And Orhan Pamuk from The New Life, I read a book one day, and my whole life was changed." It can happen. Maybe you know that already. The scientist Carl Sagan, or Sagan, I've heard it both ways, on the miracle of the written word from an evolutionary perspective. For 99% of the tenure of humans on Earth, nobody could read or write. The great invention had not yet been made. Except for first-hand experience, almost everything we knew was passed on by word of mouth, as in the children's game telephone. Over tens and hundreds of generations, information would slowly be distorted and lost. Books changed all that. Books, purchasable at low cost, permit us to interrogate the past with high accuracy, to tap the wisdom of our species, to understand the point of view of others, and not just those in power. To contemplate, with the best teachers, the insights, painfully extracted from nature, of the greatest minds that ever were, drawn from the entire planet and from all of our history. They allow people long dead to talk inside our heads. Books can accompany us everywhere. They are patient where we are slow to understand, allow us to go over the hard parts as many times as we wish, and are never critical of our lapses. Books are key to understanding the world and participating in a democratic society. Thank you, Carl Sagan. From the Diary of Anais Nin, Volume 1, she was 28 when she wrote to her best friend back in 1931, "You live like this, sheltered, in a delicate world, and you believe you are living. Then you read a book, Lady Chatterley, for instance, or you take a trip, or you talk with someone, and you discover that you are not living, that you are hibernating. The symptoms of hibernating are easily detectable. First, restlessness. The second symptom, when hibernating becomes dangerous and might degenerate into death, absence of pleasure. That is all. It appears like an innocuous illness. Monotony, boredom, death. Millions live like this or die like this without knowing it. They work in offices, they drive a car, they picnic with their families, they raise children, and then some shock treatment takes place. A person, a book, a song, and it awakens them and saves them from death." Thank you, Anais Nin. Wow, very dramatic, yes. And her photograph of her, which you can't see, is quite dramatic too, holding a cigarette holder. Yes, quite a striking looking woman. She was. Well, before we continue on, I do have some questions for you about the joys of books and reading, including what are the greatest joys of books for you? Books as objects, as talismans, as transporters or teleporters, or sources and places of delight and discovery, and of the act, the tactile as well as the emotional experience, in the physical reading of a book, the engagement of the senses through the eyes, the skin, the lips and mouth and ears if you're reading aloud, and even the nose, taking in the aroma of a book, especially an old one, a cloth or leather-bound old one. What are your favorite childhood memories of books or reading? Whether fairy tales or other kinds of stories, from adventures to mysteries. Who taught you to read, by the way? Or who have you taught to read? Perhaps children of your own, perhaps others. Maybe you're a teacher teaching reading. Actually, I'd like to hear from you about, if you are, and if you've been doing it for a long time, what has changed since then from your perspective about children's interest in books and reading them and how well they're doing it and their enthusiasms. Yes. What about books you've gone back to reread at different points in your life? And how did they speak to you differently when you did and when you have? Maybe you're doing that now. Do you love libraries, the bookstores, nosing around in them? Or I love secondhand bookstores, really good ones all over when I'm traveling. Seeing what speaks to you or what treasures you may serendipitously find. It's like beachcombing, but instead it's book combing. It's my word for it. What about the most moving book you ever read? Or the most illuminating, or the most surprising, or enchanting? Or perhaps unsettling? In a good way. What's the best book anyone ever recommended to you? And weren't you happy about their recommendation? Might have changed your life. I know some people have recommended books to me. They're rather earth-shattering in the right way. If you were stranded on a desert island and could only have one book with you, what would it be and why that one? Can you imagine a world without books? I can't. May it never be so. Yeah, and I mean the real deal book, not the book in the ether, not the Kindle book. But they're fine, but nothing like the genuine article for me. Yeah, I'm always greatly and happily watching them. Anywhere I've lived, they're all about books of all kind. Like my taste for many things, from music to art, is very eclectic. I love having them around and reading a number of them at a time. Many are open to different points, depending on what feeling place I'm in or what my intuition is calling me to read next. And at times, I've spoken about this, I think, on another show at some point, about doing some bibliomancy, which is pulling a book at seeming random, letting it fall open in your hands and letting your eyes fall on a line or a page or a passage and seeing how it relates and resonates with some aspect of your life right now. It usually does. It's usually quite amazing that there's some wonderful synchronicity. So try that. Try that out. Yeah, I'd love to hear if you do and what happens, and yeah, share some notes with me. Well, dear listeners, let's keep inviting and appreciating the myriad joys of our and other books and our reading of them. Shall we? I hope so. Let's hear from Pablo Neruda, Ode to the Book. Let me have a sip before we go into Neruda. When I close a book, I open life. I hear faltering cries among harbors. Copper ingots slide down sandpits to Tocopilla. Nighttime. Among the islands our ocean throbs with fish, touches the feet, the thighs, the chalk ribs of my country. The whole of night clings to its shores. By dawn it wakes up singing as if it had excited a guitar. The ocean's surge is calling. The wind calls me, and Rodriguez calls, and Jose Antonio. I got a telegram from the mine union, and the one I love, whose name I won't let out, expects me in Bukalemu. No book has been able to wrap me in paper, to fill me up with typography, with heavenly imprints, or was ever able to bind my eyes. I come out of books to people orchards with the horse family of my song, to work the burning metals or to eat smoked beef by mountain firesides. I love adventurous books, books of forest or snow, depth or sky, but hate the spider book in which thought has laid poisonous wires to trap the juvenile encircling fly. Book, let me go. I won't go clothed in volumes. I don't come out of collected works. My poems have not eaten poems. They devour exciting happenings, feed on rough weather, and dig their food out of earth and men. I'm on my way with dust in my shoes, free of mythology. Send books back to their shelves. I'm going down into the streets. I've learned about life from life itself. Love I learned in a single kiss, and could teach no one anything except that I have lived with something in common among men, when fighting with them, when saying all their say in my song. Thank you, Neruda. Well, what about the pleasures of first and second-hand bookstores that I mentioned earlier, or bookstore cafes and libraries? What are your good memories and experiences of them? Here's Jill Baumgartner's poem from 1995, Buswell Library. The pleasant mustiness of old books, the stiffened bindings of the new, and the smell of ink, paper, glue, and you have found your way again. The college stacks, the secluded carols, the whisper squeak of the librarian's cart. Up the back stairs into the room called Kilby, quiet with the hush of study, the scratch of pen, the click of laptop keys, a muffled rattle of ideas. This is the place where words regain their meaning. The books, Tolkien, Chesterton, packed in like bricks, Sayers, Lewis, MacDonald, and parked on tabletops, Barfield, Williams. Occasionally a spray of dust-moted sun, and through the windows a glimpse of the unwritten world outside these words. You have missed entire seasons inside such spaces. The ripening of summer, the blazing of fall, besotted with words, breaking print into patterns, tracing images, wrestling language amidst the undiscipline of marginalia in rooms like this, filled with the whisperings of words, not words that fall back inside themselves like ice on a thawing pond, but words that disperse to fill a space, that breathe the breath like breath that weaves the pliant silence into the warp and woof of music. About that for an ode to a library. Thank you, Jill Baumgartner, Buswell Library, 1995. Amy Lowell. This is from a group of her short poems, The Bookshop. Pierrot had grown old. He wore spectacles and kept a shop. Opium and hellebore he sold between the covers of books, and perfumes distilled from the veins of old ivory, and poisons drawn from lotus seeds 100 years withered and thinned to the translucence of alabaster. He sang a pale song of repeated cadenzas in a voice cold as flutes and shrill as desiccated violins. I stood before the shop, fingering the comfortable vellum of an ancient volume, turning over its leaves, and the dead moon looked over my shoulder and fell with a green smoothness upon the page. I read, "I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt have none other gods but me." Through the door came a chuckle of laughter, like the tapping of unstrung kettle drums. For Pierrot has ceased singing for a moment to watch me reading. Thank you, Amy Lowell, for that. Billy Collins, books. From the heart of this dark, evacuated campus, I can hear the library humming in the night, an immense choir of authors muttering inside their books along the unlit alphabetical shelves, Giovanni Pantano next to Pope, Dumas next to his son, each one stitched into his own private coat, together forming a low, gigantic chord of language. I picture a figure in the act of reading, shoes on a desk, head tilted into the wind of a book. A man in two worlds, holding the rope of his tie as the suicide of lovers saturates a page, or lighting a cigarette in the middle of a theorem. He moves from paragraph to paragraph as if touring a house of endless paneled rooms. I hear the voice of my mother reading to me from a chair facing the bed, books about horses and dogs, and inside her voice lie other distant sounds, the horrors of a stable ablaze in the night, a bark that is moving toward the brink of speech. I watch myself building bookshelves in college, walls within walls, as rain soaks New England, or standing in a bookstore in a trench coat. I see all of us reading ourselves away from ourselves, straining in circles of light to find more light until the line of words becomes a trail of crumbs that we follow across a page of fresh snow. When evening is shadowing the forest, small brown birds flutter down to consume them, and we have to listen hard to hear the voices of the boy and his sister receding into the perilous woods. Wonderful, thank you. Thank you, Billy Collins. Always a good read at Billy Collins. Philip Levine, The Book. This muddy river, consecrated by the soldiers who fouled it in 1842, was forded 30 years ago by the parents of little Joe Rodriguez. The book we are looking at, they acquired at great cost through registered mail. It is deckled in gold, bound in leather, and substantial. Someone has written with a fine pen and flaking gold ink across the soldiers on the opposite bank, waiting to die. When I ask whose work it is, little Joe blushes, for it is his pen. It is his penmanship, but his father's anger encrusting the page. In the picture, the soldiers are Spaniards, he tells me in his strange Shakespearean English. But the men who gave their poor lives to name the river were Indians, uncles and fathers of his father, their blood sold to heaven by a priest. I wonder if he has ever said so much at once and to a stranger, or if he speaks only when his family abdicates the parlor. It is evening, warm, the house is still and crowded with solitude. He turns the page. A stone Robin Hood rides a stone horse in the white plaza of the sun. He is no one's father, no one's uncle, and his eyes, blanker than the stone eyes of the horse, look forward into the future, where the men of the world sleep in peace. Thank you, Philip Levine. I was thinking of the thrill of reading as a child that I had, and maybe you had, and where there were many good books in my home growing up. My father, even though he was dyslexic, was a very big reader and very eclectic, actually. I could tell you about all sorts of things, from all the saved National Geographics to all sorts of collections of children's stories. Yeah, it was a wonderful time reading, and I became the family reader and the go-to for how to spell things and understand certain words. That was fun too. Well, I came across David Whyte, the poet-philosopher David Whyte, that you know, I think, from listening. I love to bring him in when I can. He wrote a letter to children about reading, and I thought I'd share that with you. Dear young friend, I wish I were in your shoes now. I wish I were standing where you are standing now. I would swap everything I have learned through my reading. I would swap my entire library of 1,000 books, every journey and adventure I have taken through the pages, all the insights about the world and myself, all the laughter, the tragedy, the moments of shock and relief, all the books that have amazed me and that have made me reread them again and again to be at the beginning, as you are, so that I could read them all again for the very first time. I wish I were in your place, with all the books of the world waiting patiently for me. It would be so astonishing to come across Coleridge as a perfect stranger and hear his voice for the first time. I would love to know nothing about Shakespeare or Jane Austen, to be overwhelmed by the fact that there is a Rosalind or an Elizabeth Bennet or later an Emily Dickinson in this world, and then to see my hand for the first time attempting to write even a little like they have, to follow them in shyness and trepidation and beautiful frustration, to walk through the incredible territory we call writing and reading and see it all again with new eyes. I wish. I wish I were in your shoes, in a beautiful waiting to know, waiting to read, waiting to write, so that I could open the door and walk through all the books I have ever read or written as if I hadn't. I wish I were in your shoes now. Yours in anticipation, David Whyte. Wonderful. Love that. That's from a collection, actually, you might enjoy. It's A Velocity of Being, Letters to a Young Reader. And it's many different writers, poets, writing to children, letters like David Whyte's. And this is, Kevin Kelly wrote one to children about the glory of books and the superpower of reading in an image-based digital culture. So maybe this would be apropos for those children in our life, or those younger ones in our lives, bringing awareness to them about this. I won't read you the whole letter, just this part. Reading is a superpower that also gives you a type of teleportation. It moves you 1,000,000 miles instantly. That feeling of being immersed in a different place or even a different time period can be so strong you may not want to leave. When you have this superpower, you can see the world from the viewpoint of someone else. This helps protect you from the mistakes and untruths of others, as well as your own ignorance. More and more of our society is centered on pictures and images, which is a beautiful thing. But some of the most important parts of life are not visible in pictures. Ideas, insights, logic, reason, mathematics, intelligence. These can't be drawn, photographed, or pictured. They have to be conveyed in words, arranged in an orderly string, and can only be understood by those who have acquired the superpower of reading. It will always be with you. It will never leave you. But like all superpowers, it increases the more you use it. Thank Kevin Kelly. So I think those words are good for us too. It is a superpower. Maybe you already have it, so you know. Okay. Michael Waters, reading Dickens. Not long after the war, my father bought, by mail, the complete set of the works of Charles Dickens, each book bound in black and red imitation leather, the titles embossed in gold. The set filled a small bookcase near an overstuffed chair, where my father spent languid evenings in lamplight, feet propped on the hassock, while David Copperfield and honest Nicholas Nickleby fought their unsure way through a wicked world. He might have imagined me, his only son, not yet born, on his lap, learning to read. Each time he finished a book, he slipped $1 between the gilt-edged pages. Some nights, the money low, he and my mother bounced before the bookcase, shaking each volume, the few bills falling, enough for dinner or the double feature. Decades later, reading Dickens, I imagine those early years, their slow stroll home, her arms circling his waist, the whistling papery leaves, the bath she drew before bed, while he waited downstairs, reading Dickens, happy not to be living some great adventure, happy to close the book before my mother slept, saving the ending for tomorrow. Lovely. Thank you, Michael Waters. Thank you. I saw and was enchanted by seeing and have to tell you about a marvelous short animated film The Fantastic Flying Books of Mr. Morris Lesmore. I'll say no more about it. Just see it and be delighted. You can find it on YouTube. Let's just say it's been described as a, quote, allegory about the curative powers of story. It centers on bibliophile Lesmore and his custodianship of a magical library of flying books. It is magical, and they do fly. Yes. Rilke, Rainer Maria Rilke, on the rewards of reading and what books do for our inner lives. This is from his wonderful book, Letters to a Young Poet. So here's a piece. A world, he says to the young poet, will come over you. The happiness, the abundance, the incomprehensible immensity of a world. Live a while in these books. Learn from them what seems to you worth learning, but above all, love them. This love will be repaid you 1,000 and 1,000 times, and however your life may turn, it will, I am certain of it, run through the fabric of your growth as one of the most important threads among all the threads of your experiences, disappointments, and joys. Rilke. I spoke earlier of reading, about reading aloud, a big joy to me, certainly, often, both to read and to be read to. This is Jane Kenyon's poem, Reading Aloud to My Father. I chose the book haphazard from the shelf, but with Nabokov's first sentence, I knew it wasn't the thing to read to a dying man. The cradle rocks above an abyss, it began, and common sense tells us that our existence is but a brief crack of light between two eternities of darkness. The words disturbed both of us immediately, and I stopped. With music, it was the same. Chopin's piano concerto, he asked me to turn it off. He ceased eating and drank little, while the tumors briskly appropriated what was left of him. But to return to the cradle rocking, I think Nabokov had it wrong. This is the abyss. That's why babies howl at birth, and why the dying so often reach for something only they can apprehend. At the end, they don't want their hands to be under the covers, and if you should put your hand on theirs in a tentative gesture of solidarity, they'll pull the hand free. And you must honor that desire, and let them pull it free. Thank you, Jane Kenyon, very poignant. And I'm wondering, sort of beyond that, but around that, when have you last read aloud? And what did you read? And to who? And how did it feel? And who around you might enjoy that? Having you read aloud to them? Or them to you? Okay. Kathleen Flanagan, Flennniken. Woman reading. She licks her finger, little flick of tongue and fingertip on furlough to turn a page. A motion that distracts her. The thread of phrase, but for the word, the thread of phrase is broken, but for the word at turning. Vessel. Vessel as in ship or blood? She has to pause, all context lost, but blouse and skirt, this urge to take them off. An ache for something to contain it all. Maybe vessel, maybe L, alone, bobbing on the tongue, maybe luscious. Maybe just a finger to her lips is all the afternoon was asking for. And lays aside her book. Thank you, Kathleen Flanagan. Maybe I was thinking about my recent show, number 173, on the exotic and the erotic when I chose that poem for this broadcast. I'm not sure, but was wondering. Well, I take pleasure in seeing other people reading, friends and strangers alike. What about you? This was out on the South Fork of Long Island, Bridgehampton, New York, August 1999. Reading by the rose light for Louis Pemberton. You sitting on the low-cut lawn, reading by the rose light, fresh and fragrant at your back, the row of wild dune roses glowing over your wide straw hat and all around the edges of your afternoon paper. I remember that as if it was yesterday. Well, over the years, I've noticed and composed poems about the books in a room, usually a room I'm sleeping in, but it could be a room of my own or a friend's, or that I shared with someone, certainly when I was married. Well, here's a couple. This was in the church house on DeGraw Street, Cobble Hill, Brooklyn, May 2016. For the owners of that home, I was a poet in residence there. I had it to myself, and wonderfully, actually 4 different times over 2 years. This is dedicated to Molly and Eriko. And this was in their room that I was sleeping in. On his side, on her side. On his side of the bed, don'ts for husbands, including not sharpening pencils all over the house as you walk about. 1889. Moonwalking with Einstein. Hardwiring happiness. On her side, a 10 of clubs. Little Blue Book number 864 by Wilfred Lay, Ph.D., author of Man's Unconscious Passion. Confidential chats with husbands. Especially the complete and perfect love of one woman for you is the highest you or any man can attain in the happiness of this world. Truth. Room. By the sea. October 2006 in New York City, in my own home, my own bedroom. I shared with my wife during my married life then on Central Park West, on her side of the bed and his. On her side, the Great Fire, Passionate Marriage, Justine, Anna Karenina, and Vanished Splendors. On his side, Rain in the Trees, Vintage Spirits, The Perfect Egg, and a little saltwater amnesia. So you might have fun with that yourselves. One last one is at the house of a very dear friend, a naturalist friend. This was out in February of 2017 in La Habra, California. The stories in my room. Man in the landscape. Engines of creation. The earth moved into the heart. The center of life. Mystery dance. Bestiaire d'amour. The forest. Time without clocks. Intuition. Everyday wonders. Poetry speaks. Wouldn't you like to be in his library? Oh, he's quite a reader and collector of books, and how about those? Just those alone. Yes, I read some of them while I was staying there. All right, on we go. Well, I was going to read you another. I've got 2 more Billy Collins poems, but I'm going to spare us this one for now because I want to stay in time. But I'm going to point you to it. Well worth it around our theme and near to my love of book titles and book covers. He talks about titles. And it's Reading an Anthology of Chinese Poems of the Song Dynasty. I pause to admire the length and clarity of their titles. That's the title. It's a long title, but there it is. Billy Collins. Okay. Here's one of mine. Under a first full moon on the year 2018, dedicated to Deborah Lauren Lang up in Maine, a moon lover like me, and a book lover, but a moon lover. So here they come together. Lunar Litscape. At precisely 9:25, when the moon, the first and most abundant one of the new year, was perfectly full, thousands of readers, many with mittens, opened their novels and poetry collections, their unfinished mysteries, promising short stories, and began to read. By the cleagishly bright lunar light, some silently, nocturnally, in the outdoor reading rooms they shared with the stars and the owls, some sotto vocely, others to listening friends, even declaimingly up to the moon itself, which was, that night, all wide-eyed, open-eared. Lunar Litscape. Well, some apropos anecdotes that I found for us. 60-plus years ago, Ernest Hemingway was awarded the American novelist, was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. Well, in 1926, his novel, The Sun Also Rises, was published, and it was hailed then as the quintessential novel of the lost generation, of which 27-year-old Hemingway was a part. This was one of the first times his blunt and clipped style came to the fore, as shown in this beautifully simple passage. In the morning I walked down the boulevard to the Rue Soufflot for coffee and brioche. It was a fine morning. The horse chestnut trees in the Luxembourg gardens were in bloom. There was the pleasant early morning feeling of a hot day. I read the papers with the coffee and then smoked a cigarette. The flower women were coming up from the market and arranging their daily stock. Students went by going up to the law school or down to the Sorbonne. The boulevard was busy with trams and people going to work. And for whom the bell tolls. He was 41 in 1940 when that was published. The story of a young American fighting in the Spanish Civil War. The novel is regarded as one of his absolute best works. You may or may not know it. Here's a passage. How little we know of what there is to know. I wish that I were going to live a long time instead of going to die today, because I have learned much about life in these 4 days, more, I think, than in all other time. I'd like to be an old man to really know. I wonder if you can keep on learning, or if there is only a certain amount each man can understand. I thought I knew so many things that I know nothing of. I wish there was more time. Thank you, Ernest Hemingway, and for all your fine books. Yes. Okay, coming into our last sharings and musings for this week together, from the Marginalian, Reading for Life, Polish poet Alexander Watt, on how books helped him survive in a Soviet prison. In 1939, to escape the Nazi invasion of Warsaw, the Polish poet, memoirist, and futurism pioneer Alexander Watt fled to the city of Lviv, then under Soviet occupation, because poets and artists are always the first to be targeted by totalitarian regimes. Quote, tyrants always fear art because tyrants want to mystify, while art tends to clarify, Iris Murdoch observed in her superb meditation on literature as resistance to tyranny. Watt was arrested, thrown into a series of increasingly menacing detention facilities, eventually ending up at the infamous Lubyanka prison near Moscow. What kept him alive there, amid the unbearable privations, the bleak prospects of release, and the harsh physical and psychic abuse of the Soviet, quote, investigators, was literature, an experience he recounted in his posthumously published memoir, My Century. So here's a line from that. Reading marshaled my intellectual and spiritual resources, made me stronger. It truly was like touching the earth for Antaeus. No doubt that was because what I primarily filtered out from books, any sort of book, was the poetry they contained, and it was only in prison that I became aware of a certain banal truth, one that I had often doubted, namely, that I am a poet. You are. Adrienne Rich, on how reading emancipates. This is from her book on Lies, Secrets, and Silence, Selected Prose, 1966 to 1976. A couple of snippets. The decline in adult literacy means not merely a decline in the capacity to read and write, but a decline in the impulse to puzzle out, brood upon, look up in the dictionary, mutter over, argue about, turn inside out in verbal euphoria, the, quote, incomparable medium of language, Tilly Olson's term. People grow up who not only don't know how to read, a late acquired skill among the world's majority, they don't know how to talk, to tell stories, to sing, to listen and remember, to argue, to pierce an opponent's argument, to use metaphor and imagery and inspired exaggeration in speech. People are growing up in the slack flicker of a pale light which lacks the concentrated burn of a candle flame or oil wick or the bulb of a gooseneck desk lamp. Well, how about those words? Jeffrey Skinner, The Bookshelf of the God of Infinite Space. You would expect an uncountable number, acres and acres of books in rows like wheat or gold bullion, or that the words just appear in the mind like banner headlines. In fact, there is one shelf holding a modest number, 10 or 12 volumes. no dust jackets because no dust. Covers made of gold or skin or golden skin or creosote or rain-soaked macadam or some mix of salt and glass. You turn a page and mountains rise, clouds drawn by children bubble in the sky. You are 20 again, trying to read a map dissolving in your hands. I say you and mean me, say God and mean librarian, who after long research offers you a glass of water and an apple. You, grateful to discover your name, a footnote in that book. Good. Good one. Jeffrey Skinner, The Bookshelf of the God of Infinite Space. Well, this is an extremely fresh poem for you that I wrote, dedicated to my fellow poet, Dee Dee Cummings, up in Vermont, fellow poet and publisher. I wrote that from here in Westerly by the Sea on the 10th of September. So it's called Between the Covers. Between the covers of your days and nights. Pages of exchanges, challenges, silences, and inspirations, of glowing moments, of resonance. And no matter the plot twists, always the marvelous arc of the poetry of your mind, your heart, your being, present and eloquent beyond words. Love out to her tonight and beyond. Hermann Hesse on the 3 types of readers and the most transcendent form of reading. This is from his book, My Belief, Essays on Life and Art. I'm just going to tell you about the third one. You can find out about the other 2 from him. The third and last type of reader is apparently the exact reverse of what is generally called a, quote, good reader. He is so completely an individual, so very much himself, that he confronts his reading matter with complete freedom. He wishes neither to educate nor to entertain himself. He uses a book exactly like any other object in the world. For him, it is simply a point of departure and a stimulus. Essentially, it makes no difference to him what he reads. He does not need a philosopher in order to learn from him, to adopt his teaching, or to attack or criticize him. He does not read a poet to accept his interpretation of the world. He interprets it for himself. He is, if you like, completely a child. He plays with everything, and from one point of view, there is nothing more fruitful and rewarding than to play with everything. If this reader finds a beautiful sentence in a book, a truth, a word of wisdom, he begins by experimentally turning it upside down. Here, here. Well said. Thank you. Hermann Hesse. Alfred Kazan from A Walker in the City. I read as if books would fill my every gap, legitimize my strange quest for the American past, remedy my every flaw, let me in at last to the great world that was anything just out of Brownsville. So that when leaving the library for the best of all walks to Highland Park, I came out on Bushwick Avenue with its strange, wide, sun-lit spell. A thankfulness seized me, mixed with envy and bitterness, and I waited against a hydrant for my violence to pass. Why were these people here and we there? Why had I always to think of insider and outsider, of their belonging and our not belonging, when books had carried me this far, and when, as I could already see, it was myself that would carry me farther, beyond these petty distinctions I had so long made in loneliness? Thank you, Alfred Kazan. Next to last now, to wind things up before I give us a signing out, one more Billy Collins poem. Dear reader, Baudelaire sees you as his brother, and Fielding calls out to you every few paragraphs to make sure you have not closed the book. And now I am summoning you up again, attentive ghost, dark silent figure standing in the doorway of these words. Dryden makes you feel enclosed in the candle glow of a paneled library, leather-bound Ovid and Horace on their shelves. With Tennyson you are in a moated garden, and with Yeats you lean against a broken pear tree on a day haunted by clouds. But now you are here with me, with no particular place to rendezvous beyond the open pasture of this page. No zeitgeist marching in the background, no ethos thrown over our shoulders like a cape. This is the way we like it, I think, our contact momentary, accidental as a book by a window blown open by the wind, unnoticed by the monocled eye of history. We are together in a scene so ordinary you could be the person I held the door for at the bank this morning, or the man who wrapped my speckled fish. You could be someone I pass on the street, or an indistinct face behind the wheel of an approaching car, sunlight flashing off the windshield. I am the one driving in the other direction, looking up into the small posted mirror where I watch you diminish, my echo, my twin, and vanish around a curve in this whip of a road we will always be traveling together. Thank you, Billy Collins. Dear reader. And last, for now, friends, till we're together again here over these airwaves. This is from Quannacontag Beach, nearby, Weekapaug, Rhode Island, June 2021. A man by the open sea, open sky, with an open heart, an open book of life pages yet to be written, yet to be read. Thank you again for leaning in, thinking and feeling in, for sharing the same page of this time and this theme. An appreciation for you sharing this and other show links around to friends and posting them out to your social media. It's one of the big ways other interested listeners find their way here. Do send me, of course, I always like to ask sparkings that you get from your listening. And consider making a gift, if you would, of support for these free weekly broadcasts that I create to touch your mind, your heart, your spirit, your imagination. If there's some theme you'd like to see a future broadcast on that we haven't gotten to yet, send me an email with your suggestion, colin@thepoetorialist.com. And what about the experience of this show on the joys of books and reading? I'd welcome hearing yours. And if, by the way, you are making a contribution, thank you so much. You can do that by Venmo to Fivefold, Fivefold, at pipeline.com, or by PayPal to the same email. Or you can mail a check along to me to P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island, 02891. Or donate through my site, thepoetorialist.com, by way of the Donate tab. Meanwhile, you can hear all the broadcasts online on YouTube on the Floating Poetry playlist. And you can, if you like, explore the immersive oasis of regenesis I'm guiding, the poetosphere.com, for seekers of greater aliveness and possibility. Meanwhile, I hope you'll lean in here soon again. And until then, dear listeners, may you ever more delightedly and appreciatively make books and reading, for the goodness and gladness of it, a regular part of your vitalizing life diet, to help nourish your minds, your hearts, your spirits, and those imaginations you have. Yes. Good night for now, fellow readers and book lovers, and good spirits.